All right, welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director of La Asok. Excited to see some familiar faces and some new faces as we jump into this session, which is being jointly sponsored by La Asok and Congregation Beth Shalom Road Fade Tzedek in Chester, Connecticut. And I know that many of you are from one of those two communities, and so it's neat to bring our communities together in this way today. Our teacher for the next hour is Rabbi Marci Bellows. She is the rabbi of Beth Shalom Road Fade Tzedek in Chester, Connecticut. She grew up in Skokie, Illinois. She is married with a 10-year-old son, newly minted 10-year-old double digits son, and 4 cats. And she, among other pursuits, is the host, or has been in the past, the host of what's called the Women Rabbis Talk podcast. So if you're interested in um, her and a colleague's perspectives on all things Jewish, just go into whatever podcast app you use and put in Women Rabbis Talk. Let's say together the blessing for study of Torah, and then we're going to turn things right over to Rabbi Bellows as we study together. So I'm going to share my screen here. I'll invite you, if you feel comfortable, to unmute yourself for this moment as we bless the act study and sanctify this moment of sacred action. Please join me. Baruch atah
Baruch
Adonai,
atah
Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Adonai
melech
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
haolam,
melech
haolam,
asher
haolam,
asher
kidshanu
asher
kidshanu
b'mitzvotav
kidshanu
b'mitzvotav
to
b'mitzvotav
do
v'tzivav
a
to do
sofrei
sofrei
a
Torah.
Torah.
sofrei Torah.
Which means in Hebrew, blessed is the eternal whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring us holiness, and who commands us to immerse, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. Rabbi Bellows, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rabbi Streifer, for having me here. Um, I'm Rabbi Marci Bellows. I am in Chester, Connecticut, this really sweet little rural community in the Connecticut River Valley, and really excited to be here with all of you today. It's a perfect topic for Passover. Hopefully, your tummies are feeling okay with all the matzah, and you're here to learn some more about Miriam, who is such an important character in the Passover story, but she doesn't get enough due. She doesn't get enough attention. Um, for those who are here and who have their cameras on, has anybody ever done a Miriam's cup at their Seder? Some people have, some people have. Oh, nice. Okay. Awesome. So there is, of course, a tradition that you may or may not be familiar with of adding a cup to your Seder table next to Elijah's cup and fill it with water. And we'll talk about why water in our discussion today. And we will see that she's such a source of nourishment and of healthiness for the Israelite people. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. So excited to have you here. And as I go, I'll give opportunities for people to read if they're interested. And of course, I'm open to questions and comments along the way. So let me bring up the slideshow and get it ready for y'all.
While Rabbi Bellows is sharing her screen, let me just offer a suggestion. If you're willing or interested in reading, just say so in the chat, and that way I can call on you later on. That way we don't have to ask who will read and have that awkward silence while people are deciding whether they'd like to read.
That's great. Thank you. So, Miriam, more than timbrels. We know many of us the Miriam song by Debbie Friedman and the women dancing with their timbrels, right? But there's so much more to her. So, we're going to be learning about that today. So, I'm starting off with where we meet Miriam. We meet her in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 8 is what I've given you here today. So I would love to have somebody help read this text. I saw D is the one who offered. Yeah.
Yeah.
D, go for it.
Surely there's more than me there, if people can put their names in the chat. Meeting Miriam. A certain member of the house of Levi went and took to wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and corked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile, and his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him.
If you don't mind continuing.
The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her handmaid to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother.
Thank you so much. So, I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Midrash, but just a quick reminder about how Midrash functions. Midrash translates to interpretation. There are capital M Midrashim, which are actual official texts of Midrash, like Midrash Rabbah. And then there's little m Midrash, which is really just the action of trying to interpret the text. What are we looking for? We're looking for questions, things that are maybe missing from the text, details that are missing, things that might be redundant, things that might be confusing. And those are opportunities, and we've been doing this for thousands of years. Those are opportunities to kind of say, okay, I'm going to use my imagination and the text in front of me to try to come up with what could be missing there, and maybe even create a legend, a folk tale, a story of my own to add another layer to the text. And there are those who believe that all those layers are there meant for us to discover them and are just about as holy as the Torah text itself. It's considered oral Torah. So, for instance, I'm not going to be answering this question, but just to kind of give you the kind of question that is asked in Midrash, in this second verse on this slide, it says, she saw et hayeled, v'hine na'ar. So a yeled is a boy, a na'ar is a teen. So what happens to Moses in that moment? Is he a child or is he a teen? And so those are the kinds of questions where, there's kind of a quirk in the text. And rabbis for centuries have wanted to understand what could have happened in that moment. The English doesn't quite capture it. So we're going to go on. Thank you, Dee, for reading so beautifully. And we're going to jump ahead to one other place we see Miriam in the book of Exodus. And that's in Exodus 15, 20, and 21. So for this one, I'll just read this one quickly. Then Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women went out after her and danced with hand drums. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to God who has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver have been hurled into the sea." So this text right here follows the Song of the Sea. Moses goes through his whole song, which is, of course, as you might remember, written out in a beautiful way in the Torah. It kind of evokes waves of water as the waters are parted. And right after Moses' Song of the Sea, it tells us that Miriam was also singing and also leading the women in a song. So you might have noticed, let me just go back for a second. I bolded prophet. Why is she a prophet? Where did that come from? And that's one of those big questions that the rabbis wanted to answer. All of a sudden, she's given this name, Miriam HaNiviah, Miriam the prophet. And so what could her prophesying have been? What kinds of messages was she getting from God to communicate to the people? In Judaism, a prophet is somebody who has that direct line of communication with God. So for some reason, Miriam here is called a prophet and given that title. So what could it mean? Miriam the what? Miriam first appears in the Torah anonymously. If you notice that, the first text, she's just the sister. And then, as the sister of Moses who stands on the riverbank, we start to understand her as that sister. She's mentioned by name in the Song of the Sea, where she is called Miriam the prophet, Aaron's sister. The Midrash learns from this verse that Miriam prophesied even before the birth of Moses, when Aaron was her only brother, and the rabbis depict her character and her prophecies that preceded these events. So if she here, oh, wait, let me go backwards. is referred to as Aaron's sister and not Moses's sister, that's another place where we have a question mark of why wouldn't Moses be mentioned at this part of the story? He's the one who just sang, but the fact that she's Aaron's sister is emphasized. So, what did she prophesy? What were some of her messages that she's responsible for? Micah, have there been any questions yet, or we're good?
Nope.
No. Okay, great. Thank you. So, is she a prophetess? Would someone like to read this text? Who else is there? I saw Andy wanted to read. Yeah, Andy, go for it.
Yeah. Excuse me. Example 2 describes the birth of Moses. Verse 1 begins with the marriage of Jochebed and Amram, which is immediately followed by the narrative of Moses' birth, concealment, and rescue. This continuum actually extends over a considerable period of time, since Jochebed,
Yeah, it's easier in the Hebrew, Yocheved. Yeah.
Jochebed and Amram already had 2 children, Aaron and Miriam, when Moses was born, as is related in verse 6. The Torah apparently chose to focus on the birth of the deliverer of Israel and therefore disregarded his 2 older siblings. The rabbis resolved this seeming contraction of the events by explaining that Chebed and Amram had divorced, and Exodus 2:1 details their remarriage. According to the Midrash, when Amram took back Chebed, he did so on the counsel of his daughter.
Thank you. Oh, Andy, you're such a good sport. Thank you so much for reading. So yeah, that name is Yocheved. And a lot of times names in Hebrew that begin with a yud get a J when they're translated into English, like Yosef versus Joseph. So thank you, Andy. So what's happening here? They're wondering why in the world are these older siblings being, kind of tossed off to the side? Why haven't we had an opportunity to hear more about their birth? What were the circumstances under which Aaron was born or Miriam? Were these decrees in place yet or not? And so what the rabbis assume is they must have just wanted to focus on Moses' birth. And the fact that Aaron and Miriam are around is a given. We're going to talk about the fact that they get divorced a little more in just a moment, but I see a hand up. Toby, what would you like to ask?
That is exactly my question. I don't remember. Does it really say in Exodus 2:1 that they divorced and remarried? I don't remember ever hearing that, ever.
Yes. Great. So perfect. It's not in the Torah. It's in Midrash. This is one of those places where the rabbis are extending the story, expanding it beyond what's in the Torah, and coming up with an explanation for why are we just hearing about Moses now? What's different now from when Aaron and Miriam were born? And what the rabbis suggested is that Miriam actually was a prophetess. And we're going to see this in the text in just a second, but I'll explain it in advance, is that she received a message from God that her little brother, yet to be born, was going to be the savior of the people of Israel and was going to be the one who helped us leave Egypt after 400 years of slavery. But by then, because Pharaoh's decree said all baby boys who are born from now on are going to be killed, according to Midrash, which we'll see again in a minute, the men divorced their wives. They're like, why would we have children now if they're just going to be killed? That's horrible. So let's all get divorced. And Miriam, though, got that prophecy. And so Miriam convinced her parents to remarry so that they could give birth to the person who would redeem Israel from slavery. So that's the question there. Let's take a look. Toby, did that answer your question so far?
It doesn't. They absolutely made that up because that is
yes.
That is
you're totally right. You're totally right. And that's how Midrash works, right? Is it's identifying a question in the text and it's coming up with a possible answer. And there are plenty of times that we might think they're silly or that they don't make any sense, but the rabbis were really trying to find a level here or a layer that they felt Torah had within it, waiting for us to discover it. It's part of the puzzle. It's part of the play, if you will, that we get to have with the Torah text as we interpret it, as we discuss it and debate it. So, more about the prophetess and more about the divorce. The rabbis state that Amram was the outstanding scholar and leader of his generation. When he saw that Pharaoh had decreed that all the boys be cast into the Nile, he proclaimed, "Are we laboring in vain? We give birth to sons who will eventually be killed." And so he divorced his wife. All Israel saw this, and in consequence, they also divorced their wives. Miriam, who was 6 years old at the time, or 5, according to some of the sources, said, "Father, father, your decree is harsher than that of Pharaoh. Pharaoh only decreed against the males, but you have decreed against both males and females, because all the Israelites withdrew from their wives. Neither sons nor daughters would come into the world." So Pharaoh decreed only for this world, but you decreed both for this world and the next. A baby that was born and died as a result of Pharaoh's decree would reach the world to come, but an unborn child would not be able to attain this. It is doubtful whether the decree of the wicked Pharaoh will be fulfilled, but you, Dad, are righteous, and your decree will undoubtedly be fulfilled. Amram heeded his daughter and returned to his wife. Rabbi Streifer, what is your question?
It's not a question just as much as a thought, which is, I mean, I've heard this Midrash before, and that I think it's so interesting despite its weirdness, because I think there's sort of an optimism or hopefulness to Miriam here, right? The parents have all decided that that's it, we're done. We're not going to have any more children. There is no future. And this little girl who the rabbis say is a prophet, what is the nature of her being a prophet? She understands that there is a future. And she understands that the future requires struggle and that the struggle is worth, essentially, the challenge of right now is worth struggling toward the future, the possible future. And I just think it's beautiful.
Oh, that is such a great point and said so well, especially for the moment we all find ourselves in right now. In moments of struggle, that there is this positive future we can still all hold as a vision in our minds. Thank you so much. Yeah, Dee, what's your question?
As well, not really a question, just the last time I studied this Midrash, it was my impression that the Amram's decree was harsher because it basically would remove the lives of both the girl and boy children, whereas only
Right.
the boy children were doomed to die under the decree, even if it was carried out fully.
Right, exactly. So no babies, right? They're not just there won't be male babies, there will be no Israelite babies at all. Right. So he took it, he doubled it basically. Yeah. Thank you, Dee. So and she also adds this layer of the world to come. There's a discussion here of afterlife that's kind of slipped in, of these souls that haven't been born yet won't then be able to go to the world to come, whatever olam haba, this world after we die is. Their souls can't even go there because they're not born. So just to go on to the second paragraph here on my slide, Amram remarried Yocheved in a public celebration with all possible pomp and ceremony. He sat her in a palanquin. Aaron and Miriam danced before her, and the ministering angels proclaimed, "He sets the childless woman, a Keret Habayit, among her household as a happy mother of children." Yocheved, who had been uprooted, Nit'ak Ra, from her home as a result of the decree of Pharaoh, would now be set among her household in joy. All Israelites saw this, and they too remarried their wives. So interesting to also say that Amram is a leader within the community. Again, that's not something that's in the Torah text. We don't get that sense of how influential he is, but this Midrash is really saying his actions lead to consequences in the whole Israelite community that's there in Egypt. So when he divorces, everyone divorces. When he remarries, it's going to inspire everybody to remarry. And as Rabbi Streifer said, that's where we find hope. So also, we have the moment of her standing on the side of the riverbank, watching over Moses as he is floating down the river and, approaching Pharaoh's daughter. I have to say, of course, that it's the same image as Superman being sent away from Krypton and being going all the way to Earth. Same image. Moses going down the river, Superman being sent out. Kal El. All that good Jewish, wonderful comic book geeky stuff. So the rabbis connect Miriam standing by the riverbank with her prophesying, right? With her ability. Yes, Superman is based on Moshe. Miriam prophesied that her mother would give birth to a son who would deliver Israel. When Moses was born and the house was filled with light, Amram rejoiced and praised Miriam because her prophecy had come to pass. However, once Moses was cast into the river, Amram charged her with making a false prediction. Therefore, Miriam stood at a distance by the riverbank to know whether her prophecy would be fulfilled. So she had this prophecy. He's going to be the redeemer. Everything's going to be great once this baby's born. But then he's sent away. And so what's going to happen? Is he still going to be our redeemer, or has this all been just the whole line, the whole fate been destroyed? And I welcome anyone's questions if you want to raise your hand at some point. So rabbis say that Miriam was actually rewarded for waiting by the riverbank for a short time to learn what would befall Moses. So what was she given as a gift? Her reward was greater than her deeds several times over. For when she contracted a skin affliction, the tzora'at, right? It's commonly translated as leprosy, even though we understand it more as like a serious psoriasis or something like that. The ark, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the Kohanim, the members of the priestly class, the Levites, and all Israel, with the clouds of glory, waited for her for 7 days until she was healed. Does anybody know what that's referring to when Miriam gets the skin affliction? Anybody want to jump in and answer? It's okay if we don't. So it's the one part, if we're able to do some point, D, yeah, please.
Yeah. Miriam and Aaron had harsh words to say about who Moses married, if I remember correctly.
Yes. They were gossiping, right? And for some reason, Miriam in that moment is the only one who's punished for the gossiping she's engaged in with her brother Aaron. So she's punished with this tzora'at, with this skin affliction, which we come to then understand is a punishment for lashon hara, as a punishment for gossip. And maybe when tzora'at in Mitzorah, Parashat Tazria Mitzorah is discussed, maybe it's a punishment for lashon hara, for gossip. Ginger just asked in the chat, what do we know about Miriam's life prior to where we find her now? Very, very little. It's a great question. We really jump in at her childhood. We don't hear about her birth. And giving her the power of being a prophet, we want to know more. And I think it's another opportunity to write Midrashim, to come up with a story. What was Miriam doing during these years of her early childhood? Did she know that she had this gift to speak to God? And were there other messages she was getting and receiving from God in those early years? So yeah, we kind of just pick up all of a sudden and she's there. So the rabbis note Miriam's speed in calling her mother Yocheved to nurse Moses and her wisdom in concealing from the daughter of Pharaoh that she was the infant's sister. Why is Miriam not given a child of her own? We're going to get there. There's a midrash about that, actually. So hopefully we will get there in our time together. Awesome question. She is given children in midrash. We do have to say, like, how brilliant was she to come up with the plan of saying, like, I know a Hebrew woman who can nurse the child, and it being, of course, Moses's own mother. And we don't hear anything more about that But somehow Moses gets that like little pintalayid, that little bit of being Jewish, and is able to express that, unfortunately, when he kills the taskmaster who's beating the Israelite slave later on. But something about Yocheved being able to nurse him, we like to imagine, really infuses him with some kind of Jewish identity, hopefully. Toby, what is your question?
It seems to me that if Miriam was approximately 6 years old when this happened, it
Uh-huh.
would be natural for her to recommend her own mother to nurse the baby. Um,
Mm.
if in fact her mother, Yocheved, had not already told her that she would be able to do that. That's perfectly natural for a child that between a child that age and her mother.
That's a great point. Maybe it was just like, hey, I know somebody who's nursing right now. Happens to be my mom, parentheses, right? Which she doesn't say out loud. But yeah, that's a great point. Maybe it
I
was just
mean,
kind of the natural
Yocheved
conclusion.
Yocheved could have told her that. After all, it was Yocheved really who told her to put the baby in the basket. They made the basket together. It's a mother
Ah,
and daughter thing.
I believe that's Midrash also, that they made it together. I don't believe we're really told who made the basket.
Well, we're
Um,
already hearing a lot of Midrash.
yes, that's the whole point of today is going to be lots of Midrash about Miriam because we know so little about her in the text itself. Dawn just asked, would I be able to summarize the questions? Not everybody can be heard. I'm so sorry to hear that. And I will, yes, I can repeat people's questions out loud. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Let me
Yes.
know if you can't hear me okay. And then Christina said it's remarkable that she could speak with God, but the more so that anyone listened to her at age 7 about, well, anything. That's a great point too. Because she could just be a kid who's got like this fantastical life inside, and they're like, okay, she's just talking about God again. So, could be. That's really interesting. We'll go on. Could Miriam have been one of the Hebrew midwives? We know that there's these two midwives who serve the Hebrew mothers. Whether they are Hebrew themselves or just the midwives to the Israelites is unclear from the Hebrew. And the rabbis play with the idea of could Miriam have been one of the midwives? Was she maybe older than we even think? So let's take a look at some of these midrashim. Oh, first, we're going to look at the text itself to see what it's based on. Is there somebody who would like to read for a moment? Was there anybody else?
I can read.
Oh,
And if
thank
anybody
you.
else wants to, then go ahead and say so in the chat, but I'll read this time. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live.
Please continue.
So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God.
Thank you. So there's these women at the heart of the story that maybe today in our Haggadah, we emphasize more their presence in the timeline of what takes place. But it's really easy to miss Shifra and Pua here because they're mentioned so quickly. They're actually part of they're some of the heroes of the Passover story that allows Moses to survive because of their kind of acts of civil disobedience. So could Miriam equal Pua? In order to get to this, the rabbis are going to play with language a lot. I'm going to try to help us all follow it, and we'll see where we go. So the rabbis identify Miriam with Pua one of the two Hebrew midwives of Shiphrah and Puah, who served the Israelites during the Egyptian enslavement. Why was she called Puah? Like, was this a nickname for her? Because she appeared, Hophia, same root word, with good deeds for Israel. In another explanation of her name, when she went with her mother to the expectant woman, she would bleat, Poah, like a sheep, meh, to the women in labor, which acted as a stimulus and aided the woman's delivery. Another view has her squirting nofa'at, wine, into the baby's mouth, causing the newborn to cry out when it was thought to be stillborn. So here's three Hebrew words that are connected to Puah, that they're saying, oh, she's evidence of all these other forms of the word. Maybe she is Puah. And it continues a little bit more. Another explanation of her name relates to her behavior toward Pharaoh. When she heard the royal edict, she was insolent, Hophia panim, toward Pharaoh, and looked down her nose at him. She told him, woe to you on the day of judgment, when God will come to demand punishment of you. Pharaoh immediately became enraged at her and wanted to kill her. She was saved thanks to her mother, who mollified him and said to him, do you take notice of her? She's a baby. She knows nothing. We can all kind of picture how she did that and calmed her down. So interesting. Could she have been Puah? Another explanation of her name is related to the birth of Moses. Puah, Miriam, would cry out, Poah, with divine inspiration and say, my mother shall give birth to a son who will save Israel. And I try to give the citations of these everywhere I can. This one's from the Talmud in Sota. In another exegetical account, she was called Puah because of her insolence. Here's another case of insolence, which in this depiction was directed against her father, Amram, in protest against his abstinence from his wife when Pharaoh ordered that the Israelite boys be cast into the Nile. Another etymological tradition explains that she was so named because she cried out, Po'ah, and wept for her brother Moses when he was cast into the river. So really interesting. Could she have been Puah? It changes your reading of the whole story if you see that like she was given this nickname for these reasons. And was she rewarded perhaps for her protesting? Here, when we asked, like, well, who are her children? According to the rabbis, her reward for not heeding Pharaoh was having progeny who would be sages and kings. Because remember, it said God was going to establish households for them. One of her descendants was Bitzalel, the artist who's able to create the tabernacle. He was filled with wisdom, as Exodus 31:3 attests. I have endowed him with a divine spirit of skill or wisdom. The Midrash ascribes the exceeding wisdom of the tribe of Judah to Miriam's merit. So could all of Judah have been rewarded because of Miriam, even though they were Levites, of course, but she could have married into Judah. Another tradition attributes royalty to her by merit of her conduct. For there's a tradition that King David was descended from her. These traditions are exegetical, right, midrashic expansions of the description in Exodus 1:21 of the reward that God gave the midwives. God established households for them. So interesting. Could she have been the mother of Bitzalel or the grandmother of Bitzalel? Could she have, could King David have come from her line? Those are incredible assertions to make, even though, again, there's really no clue in the text itself of this, but the rabbis give Miriam so much importance. Just to pause that for a second. And Dee, I see your comment. Perhaps her insolence was so surprising that people listened to her reflexively, which is how she got heard as a 7-year-old. Just to pause for a second from the screen, think about how women are often portrayed in the Torah text itself, maybe even in Midrash, if you've had a chance to study some of Midrash or Talmud. Women are not always treated so favorably. So it's remarkable that Miriam is just lifted up in so many ways for us to appreciate all the more so. Yeah, Rabbi Streifer.
Oh, see, that's interesting because this is going to be the other side of the coin, or the counterpoint
Yeah.
to what you just said, which is I was thinking that as much as the rabbis are praising and lifting up Miriam here, they also can't imagine her not in the traditional women's role of mother or grandmother, right? If
Ooh.
she's important, she's got to be the great great grandma of somebody else important, Betzalel and King David, which in some ways, like it lifts up Miriam. But in some ways, I think it also diminishes Miriam because she doesn't get to be just her own person, or even to have, like, they give her a whole family that doesn't exist in the Torah because that's
Yep.
how they understand women's role.
Mm. You're right. We could totally read it that way. And I encourage everybody to, come up with your own interpretation. That's part of the joy of studying Torah and Midrash in this way. I love that, was she not important enough on her own? We had to link her in some way to these other important characters. And then Sabrina points out, and they don't give her descendants who are women. That's true. We don't have any other exceptional women, though there are, she could have been linked with maybe Deborah, or somebody else who came later, but she's not. So that's a great point. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing. Okay. So now let's get to the Song of the Sea, that quick quote I gave you from later in Exodus when they dance on the shore with their timbrels. Okay, so we're now at my favorite midrash. Here's one of my most favorites that we're going to take a look at. The rabbis praise Miriam's great trust in God and steadfast faith, which are reflected in the very fact of Miriam's having a timbrel in her hand. So let's think about this for a second before I go on. You're escaping from your house very, very quickly. You've been told God that Pharaoh has finally said, I will let you go to go and pray to your God. You can leave Egypt. You're grabbing the very most important things, of what you would grab on your way out of your house. Would you grab a musical instrument? Why do the women have musical instruments with them? Is the question the rabbis asked. And so, what they say here, going back to the text on the screen, they ask, whence did the Israelites have timbrels for dancing in the wilderness? Rather, the righteous trusted in God. They knew that he would perform miracles and mighty acts when they would go forth from Egypt, and they prepared themselves timbrels and dancing. So they had so much faith, the women did, that they're like, we're going to need this tambourine to celebrate on the other shore of the sea when we get there. I love that the women are given that sense of faith that everything was going to turn out okay. They did grab all the materials to build the Mishkan, yarn and dolphin skins et al. Yeah, that's one of those things where we're not, we always ask, where do all these things come from? We know that they quote unquote borrow some gold and silver from the Egyptians on their way out, right? The dolphin skins and the yarn and the, crimson thread and things like that. That's always an interesting question. But of course, we also know the bread wasn't allowed to rise. So somehow they're grabbing all the stuff and they're running at the same time towards the Sea of Reeds. So that's where the Midrashim start to fall apart a little bit, because it's going to support one idea, but then get kind of caught up in a contradiction with another idea. And that does definitely happen all the time. So, and then we have a question, is dolphin the actual translation of what that animal is? And it's not always clear. So Toby, yes, what would you like to add?
I'd like to add that when they, on the mad rush to pack and get out, nobody thought they would encounter the sea at all. The sea, I believe, was not part of the original routes. Anyway, they didn't think about the sea, but they certainly thought that life without music is just not possible.
Thank you. I love that focus, that interpretation. And Jamie just said something similar in the chat. Thank you, Jamie. Could there be a humanist explanation that recognizes the importance of joy and art to a culture's continued existence? Like, why survive if without music? Oh, that just makes my heart swell. You're absolutely right that that music is so much at the core of who people are. Same with Bezalel being an artist, and that artistry has to go into the building of the tabernacle, not just, kind of cold engineering or architecture, but actual art. Yeah, Viva.
We're going to tie back to other stories of suffering. In the Holocaust, they had the women's orchestra in Auschwitz, which helped the women survive. So maybe in fleeing, if you're thinking of fleeing, would you grab a tambourine? Well, in the Holocaust, these people must have grabbed their musical instruments.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to add another, like a real life story to that wonderful comment of Eva, is the cantor at our synagogue has a mandolin that her mother escaped the DP camps with. She doesn't know how. She doesn't know how that mandolin survived all these years, but it was taken out of the Holocaust experience and has survived, another 100 years or so. And she plays it actually at this time of year during the Omer. Yeah, Viva, did you want to make another comment?
I personally know Rabbi Plaut, who survived Kristallnacht and was given a Torah by I think he was given it by a Christian minister, and it's in the Holocaust Museum in Toronto.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so many stories of things being saved when otherwise, we can't imagine, would we make the same choice? It's a hard question to ask. Would we make the same choice? So thank you, everybody. Let's go back to the text on the screen. The rabbis take note of the fact that these verses refer to Miriam only as Aaron's sister and not as the sister of Moses and as a prophet. They assert that Aaron acted selflessly when Miriam suffered her skin affliction, and therefore she is called Aaron's sister. As regards the omission of Moses, this verse teaches that her prophecy began before Moses was born. So some of that we had read before, but the part about Aaron acting selflessly when she suffered her skin affliction, that's a new aspect, like a new idea that's being introduced in this midrash. That's definitely up for debate of, how was he acting when she was the only one who got hurt? It sounds like an apologetic a little bit. So so Dee just said it feels like a misogynist interpretation. Yeah, that starts to bring in some of that negativity. Let's go on. Miriam as a leader. Miriam is portrayed as an integral member of the Moses, Aaron, Miriam leadership triumvirate. In the Midrash's allegoric interpretation of the cupbearer's dream, now we're jumping to the Joseph story for a moment. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam they're interpreted as the three branches of the vine from which the people of Israel emerged and blossomed. According to another view, the three branches are the manna, the pillar of cloud, and the well, which are the three gifts that Israel received by merit of its three leaders. So going back quickly to the cupbearer's dream, if you remember in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is how it is in my brain, the cupbearer is telling his dream, and here it is. Then the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. He said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were three branches. It had barely budded when out came its blossoms and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." So these three branches could be Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Dee shares that there's a nicer interpretation, but she doesn't want to derail things. You'll have to tell me later. So thank you. And Jamie said she was going to say man gets credit for doing the bare minimum. Aaron was just nice to her, just kind enough, right? That he gets credit for that. Yes, that is a fair criticism. So Miriam's well, this is really, I think, one of the best things attributed to Miriam. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Zin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. So that was one of those big question marks, which you start to think like, wait a minute, Miriam dies and immediately the people don't have water. Is there a connection there? So Midrash runs with that and they invent a well. And this leads to Miriam's cup as well, is that there's going to be water associated with Miriam. It's also in her name, of course, right? Miriam, bitter water, Mar Yam, or bitter sea. So water is in her name. The description in Numbers 20 of the death of Miriam is immediately followed by the episode of the waters of Meribah. Miriam died there. The community was without water. The rabbis learn from this juxtaposition that Miriam's death resulted in the dearth of water. They accredited to her the existence of the well that accompanied the Israelites on their wanderings in the wilderness and provided them with drinking water. The well, according to the rabbis, was one of the things created on the eve of Sabbath at twilight. They depict it as a wondrous well that flowed from itself, like a rock full of holes. So there's a well that travels with the Israelites through the wilderness for decades, and they're able to drink because of it. Dee, yes, please.
Something else we noticed last year is that when Miriam dies and they become thirsty, the Hebrew people change direction. So they're going mostly north and right into the promised land. They're pretty close to the land that's the Jordan area. And at that point they turn southeast and they start following water sources all the way. So they can't leave the water sources and they get quite lost for a while. And it's like a big chunk out of their journey because they have to follow the water sources.
Wow, what a cool point. I have never heard that before. That's cool. I want to like check out the map now and see. It sounds like it's an important detour, right? They now have no more water. They've got to find water. Yeah, that's so great. Thank you, Dee. So a couple other cool things about this. The Midrash lists the well among the 3 gifts that were given to Israel by merit of their leaders. The manna was given on account of Moses, the pillar of cloud by merit of Aaron, and the well by merit of Miriam. The well that then reappeared by merit of Moses is the one mentioned in the Song of the Well. So Miriam dies in Numbers 20, and in Numbers 21, there's this strange diversion, the strange moment of like, we're going to sing a song about a well. So everybody listen up. And it's like, why are we singing about a well? I don't know, but maybe it's having to do with Miriam's well. Then Israel sang this song, "Spring up, O well, sing to it, the well that the chieftains dug, that the nobles of the people started with maces with their own staffs." So interesting. But all 3 gifts, the well, the manna, and the cloud, finally disappeared upon the death of Moses. According to the Agadah, which is Midrashic folklore, this well continues to issue within the sea, perhaps like it's still there, or in the Sea of Galilee. Miriam's names. What is her name? Could it be Miriam? We already heard that she could be Pua, but there's a lot of other names given to her. In the rabbinic etymological explanation, the name Miriam reflects the bitterness, like maror, right? The same kind of word like maror, of Israel's enslavement in Egypt. And they say miror. The Torah is silent concerning both Miriam's marriage and her children. According to the Agadic tradition, right, this folkloric tradition, she was married perhaps to Caleb. Hopefully you remember Caleb, and that he is, along with Joshua, the only other one of the 12 scouts who go to the land of Israel and bring back a report from their reconnaissance. And he's the only other one who's positive about what he shares with the Israelites and doesn't spread calumnies, which is that great word that they use. And thereby she entered the family tree of Judah. The names of Caleb's wives and those other women who appear in the genealogy of Judah in Chronicles were understood by the rabbis as appellations for Miriam that describe her and her traits. So they're listing all these names, but they're really all about Miriam and their different aspects of who she is. Some of the names related to her skin affliction. Wouldn't that be terrible? Like if your nicknames were because you have like a bad case of zits once a month or something like that. Like that would be terrible. But they call her Azubah, for all forsook her at the beginning. Yeriot, because her face was like curtains. And he had two wives. Miriam became like two wives, Hela and Na'arah. She was not both Hela and Na'arah. Rather, she was first Hela, an invalid, and later Na'arah, a young girl. We have a comment that there's also a single midrash that has her married to Nachshon, but there are a few which marry her to Caleb. Yes. And with Nachshon, okay, you still have that connection with water, which is really cool. Other names teach of Miriam's beauty. These names, we can get behind a little better. Ardon, because her face was like a rose of Vered. Zareth, because she became the rival, the Zara of her fellow women. Zohar, because her face was as beautiful as noon, right, as the sun is shining. And Ethnan, for whoever saw her took a present, Etnan, to his wife. Like, she's so pretty, I want to get my wife a bouquet of roses. I don't know. Her other names are Aharhel, for all the women went out after her at the Song of the Sea, so she's inspiring. And Ephrat, because the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied, Peru Urivu, in her time, and perhaps with her help as well as a midwife. The name Ephrat is the basis of the rabbinical connection of Miriam with the Davidic dynasty, since David is called the son of a certain Ephrathite. Jamie just said, she's so pretty and I'm so turned on and I'm going to take that to my wife. Yeah, maybe. We could really go down that rabbit hole. That's very funny if that's like what they're implying. So then there's Miriam's death, which we talked a little bit about already, about the water disappearing. For the rabbis, Miriam's death is comparable to the death of her brothers. Miriam, like her brothers, died at Mount Nebo. And that is also known as the heights of Abarim. The names of the place of their burial denote the fact that these three prophets, Nevi'im, did not die because of sin, right? They didn't transgress. Maybe they weren't being punished at all with their deaths. They just died. Their lives were over. Nevi'im connected to Nebo. In the rabbinic portrayal, the angel of death had no power over Miriam, and she died with a kiss by God, which is a death reserved for the righteous. And Miriam was one of the 7 people over whom worms had no power. That gets a little, kind of gross. But apparently, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Benjamin, and Miriam were the people who the worms had no power over. And that's what we've got for all of these really fun Midrashim. That is a pleasure to share with you more about Miriam and give her some more of the credit that she deserves. Any final questions or comments? I've so enjoyed learning with you all. Thank you for coming and spending an hour with me. I'm so honored. And thank you to Rabbi Micah Streifer for La'asok and this great opportunity to teach. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Rabbi Bellows for this really interesting discussion. All kinds of midrash about Miriam, right? Not a single story, but many stories that weave together in different ways. It's been so interesting and so wonderful sharing it with all of you. As I mentioned in the chat, we do have a weekly midrash study group that meets on Tuesday mornings. I heard from 1 or 2 people. If you are interested, just drop me a quick note in the chat that says interested, and I'll send you an email with some information. You can come check it out, sit in, see if it's a good fit for you. As well, if you enjoyed this program, please consider a donation to La'asok to help support our efforts to create inclusive and progressive and accessible Jewish learning. And we look forward to seeing you all in the classroom soon. And I'll wish a happy rest of Pesach to everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.